Hello and welcome to another video. Today's video is for Women in Translation Month, in which I'm going to give you some hints and tips about wanting to read more translated fiction and how to kind of find the translated fiction that you might be most interested in. I think if you tend to Google just tips for translated fiction, it tends to give you lots of different names of kind of like the most popular books in translation. And there are a lot of books out there that are in translation, so sometimes it can be overwhelming, especially if you're just starting out into reading this sort of translated literature and don't really know what your tastes are yet or where to find the books that do align most with your tastes. So this video will hopefully alleviate some of those concerns by giving you some good tips that I practice myself when I want to find new books in translation, and give you ideas of where to start looking, especially if you want to read more or outside of your traditional sort of comfort zones. So I've got about 5 points I guess I want to make, so I may as well just dive straight in and start with the first one. The first tip I can really have is to look on your bookshelf. Particularly look at your favourite books. You'll see at the bottom of the spine on most books that they have sort of the picture or the name of the publisher that published them. A good thing to do here is to look at your bookshelves to see the publisher that you're most likely to buy from. That's usually a sign that they're kind of one of your favourite publishers and that the editing commissioners are going to be choosing books that you are already interested in. So once you kind of look at your shelves and you spot the publishers that kind of most come up, that's the best place to start for looking for translated fiction. Particularly today, most publishers do have a list of translated titles. They're kind of just going to be listed within their kind of normal titles. So that separation might make it a little bit harder to find. However, you can look on the publisher's websites, you can look at their blog posts, you can see things that they're talking about on their social media, or you can look in their catalogues, which you can access for free. You just sometimes might have to dig to find or search on their website how to access their catalogues. The catalogues are the books that they're going to be releasing in that next sort of season, so usually it's done within like a 6-month period, and it gives you a forecast of the books that are going to be produced. And then within that, you can tend to find ones that are in translation, and given that it's from a publisher you already trust, you have that relationship bonded with that publisher, and you have a kind of safety net that the books they're going to be producing are going to be quite likely that you will enjoy them too. Most big publishers also may have an imprint. An imprint is just a smaller subsidiary of the publisher. The biggest publishers tend to have quite a lot of imprints, but some of them might have an imprint that is specifically designed for translated fiction. For example, HarperCollins have recently created Harper Via Books, which has focus on translated fiction. So therefore, when you're looking for translated fiction through HarperCollins, if you tend to like their other books, that's a good place to start. Building up this sort of relationship with publishers, I think, is quite important as a reader. It helps you to know kind of where your favourite books are coming from, and it helps you to sort of discover new titles that you might not, because publishers have their big main titles that will make the top 10 lists in different places, but they will also have titles that are of a similar quality yet tend to just go under the radar. It tends to also help to have a little bit more of a focus, and knowing the publishers can save you a lot of time from digging through Goodreads lists of translated fictions, because you can go straight to the publisher's website, straight to their catalogue, and then there you have the list of books. This is a technique that I use quite a lot. I have my favourite publishers, and looking at their catalogues is part of a hobby of mine, I guess. There are also going to be indie publishers, and sometimes they might not be on your shelves just because they also tend to go under the radar. But there's a lot of indie publishers in the US and in the UK that do focus predominantly on translated fiction. You have publishers like Charco Press, Pushkin Press also do a lot of translation, Europa Editions. So finding an independent publisher that you like tends to be a really good sign, because where they're independent, they might have a smaller editorial team. The commissioning editors are going to be choosing most of the titles. Therefore, you have a sort of smaller pool of people whose opinion you can connect with. And if they're consistently producing books that you really enjoy, it's a sign that you and that commissioning editor tends to have similar ideas about what you like in fiction. My second recommendation is to think about the countries and the cultures that you are most interested in, and then look at the translated fiction that comes from them. This is definitely how I got into translated literature. When I was in my bachelor's, so almost 10 years ago now, I had a big interest in Japanese history, Japanese culture, and therefore Japanese literature. I of course started with Murakami because he was one of the most prolific Japanese writers that was translated into the UK, but then focusing on Japanese culture helped to introduce me to other Japanese authors. So then I found Natsuo Kirin, I found Tanizaki, and then recently I of course found Hiromi Kawakami, who is one of my favourite Japanese authors. So thinking about which cultures you are already interested in, and subsequently which countries you are interested in, can help you to limit the pool of books that you might be interested in. Also, there are a lot of smaller countries that tend to promote their literature in translation. So you can tend to look at sort of cultural ministry websites of countries of interest and find books that are being published within their country and are then being translated. For example, because I really enjoyed reading Mercè Rodoreda, who's a Catalan writer, I wanted to find more Catalan titles that I could then read in translation. And then I found an institute that promotes Catalan literature, and on that they have catalogues of Catalan literature that is being translated or being published within the Catalan language, with the possibility of then later being translated, but it gives you a view of the literature that is being made in that country and kind of gives you an idea of which titles you can then read. I think this is a very important tool to have because when you are interested in a culture, you tend to be interested in a particular mindset, and that particular mindset is best developed or best shown / portrayed through the literature. Therefore, it's kind of a safe bet that you're most likely going to enjoy the literature. You're not going to enjoy all of it, of course, because countries aren't generally just defined by their one literary style. However, it does mean that there's going to be a perspective of interest already there for you, which will increase your likeliness of enjoying that particular country's texts. So then my next point is to look at the genres that you're already interested in. There are translated titles in pretty much most genres already out there. There's children's books that are in translation, there's YA books that are in translation, there's fantasy and sci-fi books that are in translation, there's murder mystery books that are in translation, thriller, crime, there's romance in translation. All genres have translated titles also because those genres are also popular across the world. Of course, I feel like traditionally translated fiction is most linked with literary fiction, so therefore I feel like a lot of people can feel intimidated by translated fiction because of that association. But of course, when you're thinking of some of the most popular translated authors like Jo Nesbø, who is creating this sort of Scandi noir genre, there are so many authors within that is particularly genre fiction, being enjoyed so much by English language audiences. Finding your genre of interest tends to help to be able to find titles. Then it's easier, I think, to find blogs that are more focused on that genre in translation. As opposed to just finding general lists of translated things on other blog posts, finding one that actually suits your genre tastes is really important to ensure that you're enjoying your reading of translated literature. So then another one I wanted to talk about is authors' blurbs. If you think about some of your favourite authors who are writing in English, a lot of them might actually have blurbed a translated fiction book. And a good way to find this is actually to use a website called Fantastic Fiction. On Fantastic Fiction, you can type in the name of an author that you like, and it not only does it give you all the titles that they have published, it also gives you books that they have recommended or books that are similar to them. The books that they have recommended tend to be books that they have blurbed. So for example, I know that David Mitchell has blurbed lots of Japanese books in translation because he lived in Japan and his books sometimes deal with Japanese culture. And so therefore publishers look for authors in the English language whose work most reflects the translated fiction. Those publishers then get those authors to kind of support that book, and it just helps the marketing and the process. For example, with Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica, on the back you can see there's a blurb by Christina Doucher, author of Vox. Vox is like a feminist dystopian. This one is also a dystopian that's been translated. So it makes sense that they asked this English-speaking author to blurb this book in translation. So then if you go into Fantastic Fiction, look at Christina Doucher and then see which book she recommended, it's most likely this will come up and you will get a taste of a translated book that already reflects a book that you may have already enjoyed. Oftentimes also books like this, Women by Michael Sebastian, has an introduction by John Banville. Sometimes books will get forewords or introductions or afterwords written by English-speaking authors, and you can find books that might reflect your interest through the author who you already like in English and the work that they have later talked about that has been in translation. So finding those things really helps you to ensure that the tastes of your books in English writing can be translated also into the translated fictions that you're reading. And lastly, my most important point is to ask a bookseller, ask your local bookseller particularly. They know the industry, they know the books that are coming into their shops, and they are able to give you the best recommendations. For example, most recently when I went to London in March and I went to Gaze the Word, I just sent an email the week before saying I wanted 2 books and I wanted 1 recommendation. The recommendation that they gave was my favourite book of the 3 that I then later bought from them. But it just goes to show how well the booksellers know their stock, know the books that are coming in to the market, and can understand how best to give recommendations based on your reading tastes already. Of course, with everything going on, reaching out to your booksellers via email or via social media is really important and can really help to boost their business, particularly if you then buy the title from them afterwards. From my experience as a bookseller previously, getting asked for recommendations is kind of the best part of the job. It's kind of what we're there for. It's what we really hope for happens every day, but it doesn't happen every day because people don't often want to engage with booksellers. Being asked is a great opportunity for booksellers to actually talk to you about the things that they love the most. So those are my tips of how to best find translated fiction, and I hope that you do give them a go, and let me know how it goes if you do utilise any of these tips and what sort of books you find from them. I'm very interested to know how your taste in English language literature then kind of develops and into translated fiction. So to end this video, as it is Women in Translation Month, I wanted to give some recommendations of places that you might want to start for women in translation. These are books that I've read and I've really enjoyed previously, and I think, you know, they are good stepping stones into finding other works in translation. So I've already spoken about Tender as the Flesh by Agustina Bazterrica. This is a dystopian where a virus in animals kind of disrupts the food chain, and as you cannot eat meat from these animals anymore, humans have kind of then turned into eating human flesh. And it's an ethical exploration of all that comes with that, and it's very grey in its morals, and it's very interesting, very dark, kind of disturbing, yet definitely worthwhile. I've also got Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor. This book is set in a small Mexican town, and it's just a sort of saga of all these people in town based around the death of a witch. And it explores how the characters are involved or not involved in the witch's death, and how the town sort of like moves around this tension of masculinity that's bubbling below the surface. I have also got People from My Neighbourhood by Hiromi Kawakami. This is a collection of flash fiction, so very short stories, 1 to 3 pages I think for each story. It's all focused on this one neighbourhood with lots of different characters, and as the stories progress, things get a little bit more weird and weird within this neighbourhood, and you're not quite sure of what's true, what's not, but it's very charming and very enjoyable. I've also got Children of the Cave by Virve Sammalkorpi. It's a Finnish book from Pyrene Press. It's sort of told through these fragments of a diary that were found on an expedition in which this man discovered these children of the cave, and they're children who have particular sort of mutations of their body, and which kind of result in them being like half animal, half human. And it's just a meditation on what it means to be human and the sort of relationship between humans and nature, particularly within this strange, surreal environment. I've also got Bird Cottage by Eva Meyer. Now this book is a sort of fictional / non-fictional account of a woman who dedicated her life to the study of birds and set up a beautiful little cottage in which she was able to be one with the birds, and kind of the work that she did to help the birds of the local area. I've also got Arturo's Island by Elsa Morante. Now this book is an Italian sort of family saga, but only like within one generation. It's a very thick and rich telling of the subtle machinations of masculinity and family life in off the Neapolitan coast, and it's just a very sweltering story that kind of leaves you wanting to know what are the undercurrents happening here, and I really enjoyed this one. I've also got A Winter's Promise by Christelle Dabos. Now this is a YA fantasy series in which our main character can travel through mirrors. She lives on a world that has been fragmented, and each part of the world has been developed as an arc. She is then she then has to travel to another arc where she is being married, and she's trying to uncover the truth of like the history of the arcs and what is really going on about the gods who sort of own the arcs. It's very interesting, and it's the first in a trilogy, or maybe a quartet. I think it's a quartet actually, and so therefore if you enjoy that, you have a few more books to really sink your teeth into afterwards. I've also got The Last Children of Tokyo by Yoko Tawada. Now this is a very interesting speculative piece that explores the relationship between adults and children, particularly elderly adults, in which suddenly it's children that are kind of the ones who are dying as opposed to the elderly, and how that sort of impacts the society that they're living in, and how in this sort of strange dystopic future human relationships kind of manifest within this context. It's a little bit weird and it's a little bit vague, but I still really enjoyed the poignancy of it. And then lastly, I've got The Hen Who Dreamed She Could Fly by Sunmi Hwang. Now this is a sort of cute fable about a hen who wishes that she could fly, and then she escapes from the farm that she's living on and has to kind of make it in the wild. She also adopts a duckling, which she thinks is her own child, and then as the duckling learns to fly, the hen has to kind of deal with this sort of feeling of reworking her dream in a way that makes it able to be reached, as opposed to constantly wishing for something that she could never have. So they are my recommendations. They are also my tips for finding translated fiction. Do let me know what your thoughts in the comments down below, and I'll see you soon for another video. Bye bye.